And welcome, brothers, sisters, working class heroes. This is The Rick Smith Show. Thanks so much for being here today on the big program. Lots to get to, lots to talk about. The big news of the day, the first Trump press conference on the coronavirus since April, evidently. This is the first one, the first briefing since way back in April. So, things world different. This one weird. This one very strange. This one, Donald Trump actually said things are going to get worse, and that people should wear a mask. And he said when you're not able to socially distance, wear a mask. He implored young people to avoid packing bars. He almost seemed like he was taking it serious. And this is one of these moments where, having, again, you read the book 1984 as a very young person, I look at everything through that kind of frame, where everything changes, and we're always at war with one group and friends with another, and the alliances change, and all of this stuff is just up in the air. And immediately my mind went to Donald Trump now saying, we've got the best masks. We've got tremendous masks. We've always been for masks. Masks have always been great. People call me all the time, say, Donald, where did you get such tremendous masks? I'm waiting for it. I'm waiting for now if you don't wear a mask, you're you're not a Trump supporter. That I'm waiting for the world to turn back upside down and for this to now be, Trump saying, I've always been for masks. I've always said we should be wearing the masks. I wear the masks everywhere I go. And then going back and having, Fox News scrub the history and put little masks on him. I know it sounds ridiculous and preposterous and way the hell out there, but this is the world that we live in. We live in the United States of Trump, where now, I'm telling you, get ready for it, where the Trump supporters are going to be wearing the Trump masks. Because maybe someone's explained to him, hey, we could get, some Trump masks and, Trump, this, and in those stupid people that bought your book, that crappy book, and all the ones that keep giving you money and flying the flags in their front yards that they paid for, we could fleece them for a little bit more. Maybe that's part of it. Because I seriously don't think he gets that this is a real crisis. I seriously don't think he cares that people are dying. But I do find it interesting that now he has come to the realization that things are going to get worse. Which, to be honest, and one of the things I've envied about Donald Trump, and I have, is his eternal optimism. Everything's wonderful. Everything he does is fabulous. It's all tremendous. It's the best. No one's ever done it better. I kind of give him credit for, being of that mindset, because I'm not. Then again, I live in the real world and I have real consequences for things that I do, unlike our president, because nearly 142,000 people who have died, I don't know that any of them are related to him. And there was a statement out today from Kayleigh McEnany that I saw that evidently Donald Trump is tested multiple times a day, which I don't know that I actually believe. I don't know that he would tolerate, someone shoving a swab up his nose multiple times a day. Or maybe he likes it. I don't know. But it got me to thinking, why is he being tested multiple times a day when we have millions of people in this country who can't get a test and that we're not testing? Maybe we should stop testing him and test everyone else. And I know, but Rick, if we did that, we'd find more people were sick. And you go, yeah, that's kind of the point, isn't it? I saw this story by the NFL. Evidently, the NFL has 59 players that have tested positive for the virus, and they've moved them out. The league and the players union, they're still discussing how they're going to have a season. The NBA, for instance, they're in Orlando, I guess at Disney, in their little bubble. They had, I think, like 54 players. They moved them out. They claim now that in their little bubble, there's no one. No one in the bubble has the virus. And immediately I started thinking, this is, we're going to learn from a game. Granted, a multi-billion-dollar game, but we got to learn from people who run a game on how to keep the country safe, which is, what the NBA and the NFL and Major League Baseball are doing, or what you have to do. You test people early, you test them often, and when one of them is sick, you remove them, put them over there, give them a nice room with room service, maybe a nurse, who knows? You move them away, maybe colored TV, maybe one of Elon Musk's implantable music stream boxes, something to entertain them while they're away from everybody else, so that they don't go around making everybody else sick. Kind of a thought. And this, I go back to what Trump had said about young people not packing bars, because, guess what? I guess he's now figured out, or someone explained to him, that all of the old people are dying because they were saying, we're just getting rid of the old people. This is it's in the nursing homes. And I even said today, the average age is 78 years old. Yeah, but you know who gave it to them? Their caregivers, the people who go visit them, their grandchildren. The ones who are out packing the bars and not wearing a mask, them. Maybe little Barron will bring it home to him. I don't know, but it's one of these things where you just go, I hope maybe now he takes it serious. I have no view that he's going to, but I kind of hope maybe. Now, the fact that Dr. Anthony Fauci was nowhere near the press conference today, in fact, claimed that he was not invited and wasn't going to be there, again, kind of takes me the other way, that Trump, it's all about him. Especially on a day like today, where we have now hit another 1,000 deaths. We're at nearly 142,000 deaths since the beginning of this pandemic. This is now the highest since the end of May. It is going to continue to go up. Today, 63,000 new cases, 59,000 new hospitalizations. And, the CDC itself is saying that those numbers are underinflated. They could be 6 to 24 times higher in some regions than what's being reported. You look at the entire South, could be really underreported. And again, you have the governors down there who, I don't think are doing enough, because again, we know what has to be done. You have to do like the NBA is doing. You have to isolate. You have to take the sick people out. You have to trace them, follow all the people that they are around, pull them out, and separate. And then when they're better and they don't test them, then you bring them back. It just seems like we know what to do. We're just not going to do it. And ultimately, it comes down to, and I keep saying this, it comes down to leadership. And I had someone email me and say, well, you're blaming Donald Trump for the virus. It was the Chinese. Okay, the virus may have started in China. Would it have mattered if it started in Mexico? Would it have mattered if it started in Atlanta? Would it have mattered if it started in your backyard? He still handled every bit of it since that moment horribly. And up until this moment has been the one. Now, look, he said today, everyone should be wearing a mask without wearing a mask. You didn't see him walk in with one. You didn't see him walk out with one. You haven't seen him with one all day. But at least he's saying it. Now, the thing that gets me is we're looking towards major economic collapse, because it's getting worse again, much worse, and it's going to get worse. Even to use Donald Trump's words, it's going to get worse before it gets better. So what's the plan on addressing all of the needs and all of the concerns of the citizens that to this point he has left behind? Understand the Republican Party and Donald Trump do not have a plan outside of tax cuts and outside of handouts to the wealthy in corporate America. That's all they've ever had. It's the only tool in the box. That's it. There's nothing else. Period. Zip. The Democrats have basically been doing their homework, especially on the virus stuff. The stimulus stuff has been the brainchild of the Democratic leadership. And even then, I don't think it was hefty enough or chunky enough or stimulative enough. The fact that at the end of this month, that extra $600 goes away, and immediately you have millions of people who across this country are collecting unemployment because they lost their job through no fault of their own, are immediately going to fall into poverty. Because what the number I saw the other day, 75% of all of the people who are collecting unemployment because of this pandemic were making more money on unemployment than they were working. I mean, it tells you something that is seriously wrong with the income in this country. But the fact that the vast majority of them went back to the job because they had to. So the feigned outrage and the claims by our Republican senators that, well, people are just going to stay home, they're going to be lazy and collect all this money is just unfounded, ludicrous, ridiculous, and to be honest, indicative of how they feel about working people in this country, the view that they have of everyday average workers. So all of those Trump supporters who are walking around waving the flags, the GOP hates you. They've always hated you. You're useful idiots. You're just good enough to clean up their messes and send them a couple of dollars and then cast your vote for them while they continue to screw you over. Because guess what? There's nothing coming for you. They have no plan. Nothing. Yeah, do you remember the the Wallace interview, the Chris Wallace interview, where Trump said that how did he say it? We're signing a health care plan within 2 weeks, a full and complete health care plan that the Supreme Court decision on DACA gave me the right to do. I don't know what the hell that means. Nobody else knows what that means. He's going to completely undo the Affordable Care Act and rewrite it with the stroke of a pen. They're going to sign some. They don't even have a plan. What are they going to sign? There's nothing. And what this is a glaring reality that he has no idea how governance works, how American democracy works, how our country works. They have nothing. They have nothing. The Republican Party has zip. And yet today, they were supposed to hammer out some stuff. There was supposed to be some nipping and tucking, and yet Mnuchin and I guess it was Pompeo or Meadows, the chief of staff, out the door. They left. They left the Republicans because they have nothing. Now, the Republican Party, the senators wanted to stay under $1 trillion in the next stimulus. And this is one of these moments where if I were just playing a chess game, I would question the Democrats. I would question their motives, because the Democrats back in May passed a $3.5 trillion stimulus package. They passed that back in May. That could have been signed into law back in May if the Republicans in the Senate would have moved forward on it and Donald Trump would have signed off on it. We would not be in this moment of worrying about millions of people losing their homes, millions of people having their utilities shut off, millions of people losing their savings, all kinds of horrible stuff. Had they just done their job, we wouldn't be here. But the reality is McConnell, and the report was today, McConnell laughed off the fact that there would be anything done by the end of this month. And you have to ask yourself, when do we wake up from the reality that the GOP has nothing? There's no plan. Now, what's interesting to me, and as I said, if this were purely a game of chess, I would be questioning why the Democrats are giving Donald Trump tools that would make the economy so much better and make this entire process easier on families to be able to stay home and stay safe. It's from purely a chessboard game mentality, because the Republicans keep saying, well, those Democratic governors, they just want to keep the schools closed and businesses closed because they want to hurt Donald Trump. They want to hurt us in the election. And you go, but they're saying here's $3.5 trillion for you to stay home. We're gonna prop up the economy. We're gonna make sure your small businesses get funding. We're going to give people the money to stay home. If they weren't doing that, then maybe I could see your logic. But they're saying, look, science has shown us the way to stop this virus, the way to change things is to isolate. Had we just stayed the course a little bit longer without the childish Republicans and their idiots running around maybe we wouldn't be in this mess. But I know that's too much to ask. I know that our children in the GOP just have to throw their temper tantrums because it's all they've got. There's no plan. There's no leadership. It's just no, no, no. And to be honest, I've had better luck, convincing my children when they were 2 and 3 years old of eating their vegetables than having the GOP actually do something that would help working people. Something seriously wrong. Got a lot to get to today, a lot to talk about. Going to take a quick break. When we come back, we're going to talk with our good friend Nate Lerner about what's going on in Portland, also some of the coronavirus numbers. Stick around. Right back after this.
There's nothing more American than workers standing up, and the union gives a voice to win. On the Rick Smith Show.
I'm Rick Smith, and this is Labor History in 2. On this day in labor history, the year was 1877. That was the day some of the worst violence of the Great Railroad Strike erupted in Pittsburgh. The strike started days earlier. It's contested as to whether it began in Martinsburg, West Virginia, or Baltimore, Maryland. The strike spread rapidly along the Baltimore and Ohio Railroad to New York State, Pennsylvania, and throughout the Midwest. At its height, the Great Railroad Strike involved well over 100,000 workers. The strike began on the Pennsylvania Railroad on the 19th. Management repeatedly tried to move trains through the yards and was confronted by angry strikers. Pennsylvania guardsmen were called out. The strikers presented the railroad with their demands. They wanted an end to double-engine trains that required fewer workers, wages reinstated, reinstatement for their fired co-workers, and an end to pay grades. Local militia sided with the strikers and refused to show for duty. When thousands of strikers gathered at the depot, the Pennsylvania National Guard moved unsuccessfully to disperse them. Then they fired on the strikers, killing 20 and wounding 29. The strikers were infuriated by the deadly aggression and drove guardsmen into a nearby railroad roundhouse. Word spread quickly throughout the city of the massacre, launching a virtual general strike. Workers began seizing arms wherever they could find them. They set fires to dozens of railroad buildings, burned down the Union Depot, destroyed over 100 locomotives, and more than 1,000 freight and passenger cars. The next day, guardsmen shot their way out of the roundhouse, killing 20 more as they were chased from the city. A total of 3,000 federal troops would be necessary to quell strikers' fury by month's end. Labor History in 2 brought to you by the Illinois Labor History Society and The Rick Smith Show. For more information, go to laborhistoryin2.com.
Welcome back to The Rick Smith Show. Now, here is Rick Smith.
So, the thing is like I said, it seems that, maybe on a small level, Trump's getting it. The trouble is, it doesn't seem like the rest of the GOP is. Like I said, there might be some hope. There might be something there. I'm not sure on a certain level, but the rest of the party not getting it. And I looked at this story of Liz Cheney, who, Liz Cheney has somewhat been a little bit of voice of reason in the party. Not a lot, a little bit. Her and Darth Cheney, the father, doing the mask thing a while back, while the rest of the party was, no, throwing the temper tantrum, kicking their feet, doing that stuff. And evidently she is backing the opponent of one of the really crazy right-wing Republican representatives, Thomas Massie. And that's got the rest of the caucus just beyond themselves. Now, why is she important? Well, she's the conference chair of the House Republicans. She's one of the people who raise money. She's one of the people who helps steer things. And they're ticked at her because she's not walking in lockstep with the crazy Jim Jordans, the Matt Gaetz, basically the House Freedom Caucus. what were the Tea Party groups. And this is one of these moments that I look at what's going on, and you're seeing a splintering of the party. You're seeing finally, and at least I'm hoping, you're finally seeing some of the people step back and go, wait a second. Our political futures are on the line, because literally people are dying. People are getting sick. People are dying. They're losing their savings. And as I said, the reality is here at the end of this month, we're going off a cliff economically. A lot of states are struggling already. Wait till that stimulus goes away and the Senate Republicans don't do anything to get any more. And if today was indicative of how things are going to go for the next couple of weeks, don't be overly hopeful, because Mitch McConnell originally was against the idea of a stimulus check. Because for a lot of people, that $1,200, that little bit of money that Steve Mnuchin thought was going to last 10 weeks, was just enough to get by for a couple of weeks, just enough to supplement, to maybe not lose everything. And then once the stimulus kicked in with the extra $600 when people lost their job, that it added a little bit to it. So we added some little bit of money to the bottom to help prop things up. That's all gone now. Now it's worrying about, are you going to be able to pay the light bill? Are you going to be able to pay the phone bill? Are you going to be able to pay your rent? Are you going to be able to put food on the table? Is your job going to go away? And we have nothing coming out of Senate Republicans. There really is nothing. There's no plan. McConnell said that they're looking at some things. I guess they're now coming around to the idea that possibly a stimulus check may come, but for people who make under $40,000 is what he said. And again, you go very self-serving. It's going to do well for him in Kentucky, but what about higher wage states like New Jersey or New York or California? What about those states? And this is the part that really is quite telling about how Republicans legislate. It's about what benefits them first, foremost, and only. It's not about what's good for the country. It's not about what's good for society. It's not what's good for working people. It's what's good for them, what lines their pockets, what fills their coffers. And on a certain level, their voters and supporters have to know this. And I go back to healthcare. You go back to 2016, during the election, there was all this talk of the dreaded, hated Obamacare, because everyone was ticked off that they had to pay to insure themselves. They were all ticked off about their personal responsibility. They were all ticked off that somebody was going to actually make them be responsible. And Trump rode in on this idea that they were going to undo the Affordable Care Act, going to crush Obamacare, and they were going to repeal and replace. And the way he made it sound, the replacement was going to be great. And I remember at the time when he said it going, okay, well, where's the plan? I love what I'm hearing from you. It's going to be high quality. It's going to be low cost. It's going to cover everybody. It's going to give us bells and whistles, and it's going to make, the sun always shine. It's going to be cool and breezy days every day. Wherever I drive on the road, it's all green lights. It's going to be great. It's cake every day. Where's that in writing? Where's the plan? Truth of the matter is there was no plan. There never was a plan. In fact, when you listen to him, it sounds like he was talking about car insurance without actually talking about how we keep a country healthy. And now, even to this day, say, well, Republicans are always going to cover pre-existing conditions, until they don't, because they never did. I mean, reality, I know Trump loves to play the optimist card, the best ever, greatest ever, most tremendous, fabulous stuff, all that. Everything he does is, unprecedented. It's the most important, bestest. It's gravy on toast every day. And it's not. We still have millions of people who are uninsured, and millions more because of this crisis. And what have they done in these moments? There's been no leadership coming out of Washington to address these problems. And I think most people are waking up to the reality that these problems aren't new. We've been talking about them here on this show for years. The gulf between the haves and the have-nots has been wide. And it's getting wider every day. And it's now becoming more apparent to the people who in the middle class, the people who are aspiring to be that middle class, that they're on the chopping block now too. Because that job that, gave them some bit of health care that, they were comfortable with, they paid a little bit more every year, a little bit more, but it still protected them enough to where they go, okay, well, I got to pay because, it's just how things are. That's now going away. And you're getting nothing from the federal government. Nothing. They have no plan. And I can't say that enough. I watched the Wallace interview and Trump went on this whole nobody's done more than we have and we've done all this wonderful stuff. And I'm going, other than the tax cut, that was a horrible, horrible waste of money. Was an amazing gift to the very wealthy and a screw job for working people. What have you accomplished? Okay, they deregulated. There was a bunch of deregulation done. And now the EPA is saying that, the air quality is worse. And now we're finding out that people who live in areas where there's pollution, they're the ones who are dying at a higher rate from the coronavirus. We're now finding out all of these things that common sense would have told you and we should have known all along. But we forgot. And it's just one of these moments where you go, what do you do? How do you address this? The question is what are we going to do to push them forward? And that's the sad reality in this. So my thought process comes back to something very simple. What's it going to take? What's it going to take for people to finally voice their anger? And we're seeing that in the streets. Yesterday you had the strike for Black Lives. You had people who were out in the streets striking for equal justice, for socioeconomic equality. And it's long overdue. And this is a moment where it doesn't matter if you're black or white or Hispanic or Chinese or yellow or whatever. It doesn't matter. The reality is we should all be behind this. We should all be pushing for socioeconomic equality. We should all be pushing for equal rights under the law. And what are we seeing out of our leadership in Congress? Exactly nothing. And that's the part that's most frightful to me. And yet I see the Trump supporters who are so vocal because they see anything to help someone else as an attack on them. They see anything to make people's lives better as an attack on them. And it's the same old tricks that, the wealthy have always used against working people. It's the main divisive point that this country has always had, at least in my lifetime. And history has shown us that they've used race to divide people from the beginning of time. Am I hopeful that we're going to be the first generation in the history of civilization to solve these problems? No, I'm really not. But I think if we can begin to address it, I think if we can begin to close that gap, all of our lives get better. Everyone. Even the angry Trump supporter, who, as someone who emailed me recently pointed out, that the reason that they're so angry is that the life that they were told that they were going to lead isn't the life that they've been living. The reason that they're so angry is because they were promised that middle class, that they were promised that picket fence. They were promised that little house and the 2.3 kids and the wife and the everything. It hasn't worked out that way. Life's tough. And they're struggling. It's an interesting thought. I'd love to hear yours, though. You can email me, Rick at thericksmithshow.com. I'm going to take a quick break. Right back after this. Stick around.
Remembering that united we bargain, divided we beg. Rick Smith.
I'm Rick Smith, and this is Labor History in 2.
On this day in labor history, the year was 1878. That was the day that a new song was introduced to the U.S. labor movement. Reverend Jesse H. Jones set the lyrics of a poem that had been written by I.G. Blanchard more than a decade earlier. The song was called The 8-Hour Day. The fight for 8 hours had become one of the central causes of labor. In 1850, the average work week was 70 hours. This meant that workers had little time for anything else beside their daily toil. After the Civil War, calls for the 8-hour day gained momentum. It became a movement that united workers from different workplaces and backgrounds. 8-hour leagues were formed in cities across the nation. They hosted talks and rallies to spread the word about the need to shorten the work week. At rallies, protesters waved 8-hour banners. They also sang the song that became their anthem. The first verse boldly began. We mean to make things over. We are tired of toil for naught, with but bare enough to live upon, and never an hour for thought. We want to feel the sunshine. We want to smell the flowers. We are sure that God has willed it, and we mean to have 8 hours. We're summoning our forces from the shipyard, shop, and mill. 8 hours for work, 8 hours for rest, 8 hours for what we will. The 8-Hour Day song continues to be reimagined today, including this version by Rhythm Fest.
Labor History in 2 brought to you by the Illinois Labor History Society and The Rick Smith Show.
Welcome back to the Rick Smith Show. Now, here is Rick Smith.
So as I've been saying, the reality is that the Republicans they don't have a plan. There's nothing there outside of the handouts to corporate America and the tax cuts that Trump wants that, oddly enough, the Republican senators seem to be against. And you would think that they would be all in favor of it because, as I've been saying, I believe that payroll tax cuts will be one of those things that not only are not going to help stimulate the economy, definitely not going to help the people who don't have jobs, but going to harm Social Security and harm us down the road in ways that they should be in favor of because it's what they've always wanted. So it's really, really kind of a bizarre moment. But like I said, the end of the month, lots of potential trouble ahead. And here to share some thoughts on what that might look like, I've asked Jeff Hauser to come talk with us. Jeff is the executive director of the Revolving Door Project, their website, the revolvingdoorproject.org. Jeff, thanks for taking time for us.
Anytime, Rick.
So, I'm looking at the end of this month, and it's coming quick. And it's almost like a cliff. I mean, as soon as the end of the month happens, I see the poverty rate spiking and lots of people in big trouble.
Yeah, the economic calamity that is ongoing and is about to accelerate is really painful. It includes, generation of children who are going to have insufficient food. There are going to be a crazy number of evictions starting at the end of this month. And especially 1 month from now, as any of the value of the unemployment checks, the benefits that have been increased during the duration of the pandemic, as that goes away. I really fear for our society and the most vulnerable people within it. And some people who weren't even necessarily thinking of themselves as that vulnerable several months ago, but whose jobs and industries are going away. And we see a Republican Party which is much more committed to its donors and a crazy austerity agenda and ideology than to making their voters whole. It's kind of like my son is reading the Harry Potter books now, and it's kind of like a Death Eater cult going on, where the Republicans don't care about the fate of their voters, and certainly don't care about the fate of people who do not vote for the Republican Party.
Right. No, and the weird thing is, and I said this at the beginning, it's the Democrats who are, if you're looking at this purely from a chess match point of view, it's the Democrats who are making all the wrong moves in the chess game. Because if the goal is really, as Republicans have said, to get them and Trump out, putting forth a $3.4 trillion stimulus package to help the economy stay up through the election really is not a great chess move.
Yeah, I wonder if there is not a certain amount of political wisdom in the views of both Democrats and Republican politicians, in that in less polarized eras in which voters were more available to each political party, the state of the economy might have had a lot of influence on who people voted for. People, looked at how well the economy was doing, and they may have decided to vote, with or against the party in power based on the economy. I don't know that that really explains how voters think nowadays. I mean, unfortunately, in a situation in which the political parties sort of represent cultural camps that are at war with each other. I mean, think about it, like how good, if the economy were growing at 8% and unemployment were at 2%, I mean, Rick, you and I would probably not be voting for Donald Trump regardless. Like there's no economic conditions. And similarly, I think that the Republicans have come to the conclusion that the economy, the suffering that they might induce, is not going to cost them maybe that many votes. Now, I agree that even if it's not going to cost them that many votes, the difference between losing those votes and gaining them could well mean Joni Ernst is or is not reelected in Iowa. It could mean Tom Tillis is or is not reelected in North Carolina. So don't get me wrong. I don't think there are no political stakes in the status of the economy, but I do think there are far fewer than there used to be. And that means that Democrats get to do the right thing and propose really genuinely significant spending, even though Trump is president, knowing that that is not likely to imperil the chances of Joe Biden. Joe Biden will sink or swim on other issues, and things obviously look pretty good for him right now. But I think if the economy stabilizes and there are fewer evictions and fewer hungry people, he'll be okay. And similarly, I think Mitch McConnell is thinking that he can get reelected in Kentucky, kind of regardless of the economy. So it's a very weird scenario where I don't know that politicians have the same incentives about the economy that they once did.
Yeah, but my view has been, and I agree mostly with you, but my view is once we hit this cliff and you start seeing the evictions, and like in Ohio, for instance, starting in on July 10th, utilities can start shutting people's utilities off. Once all of that stuff really starts bad to happen, I think people are going to start looking for someone to blame, and I guess you could argue it would be the other party as well. I guess it's all in how you spin it. But I look at the guy who's in charge or supposed to be in charge as the one who, well, the buck should stop somewhere, right?
Oh, it absolutely ought to stop with Trump and McConnell. And I think they will feel some pain for it. But I just wonder what the arguments that, David Koch and Sheldon Adelson and other key financiers of the Republican Party, Paul Singer, what they are telling Trump and McConnell, because it has to be something pretty crazy to get the Republican Party to behave as irrationally as they are. Because, even if I think the effects are less than they once were, there definitely is going to be a negative effect on the Republican Party's electoral chances if the economy gets worse and worse and pain gets even greater. I think that's the trajectory we're on. I am not optimistic. I think a bill will pass and a bill will be better than no bill, but I don't think it is going to be sufficient. And I think that will further erode the political position of the Republican Party. But I look at the stock market, which is, in the main higher than it was in January of 2020 pre-pandemic. And I think we're in a situation in which rich people are so untethered to the lived experiences of normal people and the rich people have too much power among Democrats, but even much greater power among Republicans. And I think something is just fundamentally broken in our politics right now.
No, I agree with you. And you wondered what Singer and Adelson and Koch and all them were telling the Republicans. It's got to be, hey, great, thank you. Things are great. We've been making tons of money. And I look at, on Monday, you had Bloomberg report that the Jeff Bezos in one single day saw his net worth grow by $13 billion. And his ex-wife, who is the 13th richest person in the world by divorce, she saw her wealth grow by $4.6 billion. So when anybody says, Rick, we don't have any money, we got tons of money. We got a lot of these rich people who are loading their pockets up with huge amounts of cash and not paying but a pittance of tax on them, or any in this case.
Yeah, so that was really what went wrong with the CARES Act in March. The CARES Act in March had many great elements, including unprecedentedly adequate unemployment insurance, which is not exactly something the American economy has historically been known for, having generous unemployment insurance. That was novel and well warranted, and so definitely there were good elements of the CARES Act. But what it fundamentally did is give the Federal Reserve the confidence it needed to make clear that the rich were going to get taken care of. And sending that message to rich people in a moment in which rich people have so much political influence is really ultimately bad for the economy. You need to connect the economic interests of rich people to non-rich people, so that rich people will influence the political system to produce decent outcomes for the non-rich. I mean, obviously, in the longer run, what we need to do is equalize political power, so it's more like one person, one vote, equal shares of political influence. But under the status quo, what the CARES Act did is make sure that the rich would be comfortably rich and that the rest of us in the long run would be dead.
And that is, where do you go from there with that kind of reality? Because I agree with you 100% that they did make sure that the wealthy would be well taken care of, and that the pennies and the praise that essential workers were given, they're now clawing back to make things as bad as they were prior. And I would argue even worse, because in this next stimulus bill, McConnell has said that they're looking for employer liability relief, which means immunity for bad actors, making working conditions worse, and ultimately making things worse down the road. And like you said, eventually the rest of us dead.
Yeah, I mean, there are a few of these things that work together. There's incredible buyer's remorse on the Republican side for the generosity. And again, this is all relative. It's not like I think unemployment insurance, being a livable amount of money is a bad thing. It's obviously an overdue reform in American politics that I hope would be enduring. But there's such regret among Republicans that unemployment insurance is reasonably beneficial, because they think that might give employees the ability to go to their employer and say, well, unless you pay me more, I might figure out a way to get onto unemployment. And they would have negotiating leverage. As they get rid of the negotiating leverage that is afforded by unemployment insurance for people who feel like it may or may not be worth going to work and risking their health, they also want to get rid of the liabilities. They want to make workers have to work under these conditions, and they want to take away the ability of a worker who gets sick due to their employer's negligence. They want to get rid of the ability of the employee to sue. So they want to make the employee beg for a job and not be able to get recourse if that job is unsafe. It is so awful, and it's the type of thing that you would like to think that if Trump supporters and McConnell voters were to understand what was going on, that they would rebel, because it's really devaluing the lives of working people.
No, what it does is, it's something I've talked about on this show for years. It's taking us back to the days of the Lochner era, where if you're hungry enough and desperate enough to work in deplorable conditions for poverty wages, that was your choice, Jeff. It was your liberty. It's your freedom to be able to do that. And employers are more than happy to, well, give you crappy conditions at poverty wages so that you can get sick and die.
Yeah, I've been discussing with my colleague Dean Baker essentially the question of how much is this a stock market bubble versus is there an underlying rationale? And his argument has been, which I've been slow to accept, but increasingly think might be right, which is often the case when you disagree with Dean Baker, is that basically wages are going to go down dramatically. And you're even seeing this go to the middle and upper middle class in various ways of late. But if wages go down far enough, profits can stay stable or go down, but like your costs are going to go down so dramatically for a lot of these companies that their stock market valuation may make sense. Yeah. So I don't really know how much of this is bubble and how much of this is just a recognition that capital might be winning even further. You might have thought, well, capital was on top of labor already, but it can always get worse.
Most certainly is. So let me ask you this, because we're seeing spasms all around this country as strikes are increasing this year. And yesterday you saw the strike for Black Lives in Portland. You're seeing, more than 50 days. You've got people out in the streets, obviously protesting police brutality, but also the socioeconomics of all of the scenarios that we look across this country, because the gap between the haves and the have-nots is enormous. I'm curious your thoughts on what we're seeing going on in places like Portland.
A couple of things. One is the moment, and I like how you connected the economic strikes, Black Lives Matter, and the police repression. This confluence of forces is very reminiscent of the early to mid 1930s, in which you both had probably the strongest, most militant labor movement America's ever had. You had genuine and powerful socialist and communist movements in this country, but you also had Father Coughlin and, emergent white nationalist, basically fascist voices as well. It's a period of great tumult. And what we're going to have to hope is that Biden means it when he says that he is going to try to be a president like FDR. FDR was not a perfect president, but he was a very, very good president who, was able to shift the country into a positive direction out of a period of tremendous pain, suffering, and tumult. But what's going on in Portland is really worrisome. What I've been complaining about for quite a while about Speaker Pelosi's view of the world is it's all premised on what in the short run polls best. What are the ways of describing what the House can do that a focus group in some suburban community says is okay. And the underlying premise is if Democrats do things which are popular, they will win in the election. But just assuming we're going to have a relatively fair election in November is just that, an assumption. And I would really wish that people who have power, and while Speaker Pelosi doesn't have all the power in the world, she certainly has more power than you or I do.
Right.
I hope that she each morning wakes up and starts thinking, what can I do to protect the people in Portland and by extension the people across this country? Because what's going on in Portland is not a Portland thing. It's a test case for the Trump administration to determine what they can get away with and how they can both create chaos, which they think might be politically beneficial, but also how they can intimidate people for all sorts of nefarious purposes. And it should be
right.
Very worrisome.
No, because I said yesterday on the program that what we saw in Portland with these basically hit squads showing up. I expect them to be on November 3rd outside of polling places in minority areas in heavily Democratic precincts across this country if we don't stop this right now. I see this as potentially the voter suppression tactic that they use come November to keep people from the polls.
Yeah, that's what I fear. And I think what we need to start doing is creating some fear within the Department of Homeland Security, the people who work there, that there could well be repercussions, that they need to rein this in because they themselves could be facing either state and local sanction at some point, or that they should not be sure that Trump will hold on to power and that there might be consequences under a Biden administration. Biden also called out Putin in the last 24 hours or so, pointing out that there'll be real repercussions if Putin repeats his 2016 shenanigans. But he needs to be sending that message, honestly, to civil servants in the Department of Homeland Security. He needs to start inspiring some people to push back either out of self-interest or integrity against these crazy orders that are coming on down from the acting Homeland Security director.
And ultimately coming down from Donald Trump. I mean,
oh, of course, yeah, not to mitigate his, but people need to start looking out for themselves. If that's all that could possibly be the motivation for them to stop enacting this sort of fascistic behavior.
Yeah, because I saw someone, say that, well, why should I care? It doesn't affect me. You see them, they're in Portland, and those are just troublemakers, Jeff. They're just people out there causing trouble. They're burning things down. They're writing graffiti on the walls. They're horrible human beings. We need to stop the lawlessness. And my response was, well, I don't agree with some of that stuff that's going on, but we don't know what that person on the street corner that got swapped, just snatched up and disappeared. We don't know what they did. We don't know if there was actually a crime or if they just thought they were going to commit a crime. They just snatched people up, and I saw the videos, just snatching people up and driving them away. No warrant, no due process, none of that. That is one of these moments where you go back to the Pastor Niemöller, quote back from World War II. First they came for this group, and I said nothing. Eventually, they get down to us. That, to me, is why every person should be concerned about those videos of people who are basically dressed up like mercenaries. And for all I know, they could be Blackwater type folks. Mercs just showing up and taking people off the streets.
Right. I mean, that's why police are supposed to be uniformed, is so that you kind of know this is a legitimate person who's authorized under law. But yeah, it is, what's going on in Portland is fundamentally lawless. If the situation in Portland were so bad with the protests, there would actually be desire in Portland and Oregon for federal assistance, and that's quite obviously not the case here. Yeah. The residents of Portland do not want this because the stereotypes that are being used about what's going on in that city on Fox News bear no relation to the reality, which is that the residents of Portland feel very lucky to live in Portland, and they do not feel threatened.
But isn't that the reality of Fox News as a whole? What they say, very little responds to reality, that there's very little in the real world in what they present in their course of political theater.
Yeah, and that's why they create others and they make people fear them. And so right now you have probably millions of Americans who think of Portland, Oregon as this deeply scary place. And it's really funny because if they actually took the free market seriously, people, rents and real estate values have been going up in Portland because people want to live there. Yeah. It's just, but yeah, crazy. Consistency and accuracy is not exactly what they're going for.
Last question. Do we expect a stimulus bill? Back to the stimulus. Do we expect something by the end of the month, or was McConnell laughing it off the reality we're not going to get anything by the end of the month?
I think by the end of July is unlikely, very unlikely. I think by the middle of August, probably something passes, because there probably are enough Republican senators who believe that the rules of normal politics apply enough. And because honestly, I think in the end, Pelosi is not going to drive the hardest bargain. So I think they will eventually struggle their way to something. And it will be better than nothing. But I would not hold out my hopes for a bill that will really protect America's children, America's soon-to-be homeless, America's hungry, all the people that our society is rich enough to be protecting.
Will there be a payroll cut in it or not?
I think no. It's kind of odd, but I buy the idea that even Republican senators are a little bit confused with what Trump's up to. But they've been open enough to it that I think they've opened themselves up to attacks from people who protect Social Security, and I think those attacks are warranted. Yeah. Any Trump-supporting Republican, they got to own his crazy ideas.
And there's a lot of them. But Jeff, I appreciate the time. Always great talking with you, my friend.
Likewise. Take care.
Good stuff. Jeff Hauser, he is the executive director of the Revolving Door Project there at the Center for Economic and Policy Research. You can check out their website, therevolvingdoorproject.org. We'll get links out on social media how you can do that. Quick break, right back. Stick around. You're listening to The Rick Smith Show.
Remembering that united we bargain, divided we beg. Rick Smith.
I'm Rick Smith, and this is Labor History in 2. On this day in labor history, the year was 1931, and Chicago public school teachers went home without a paycheck. The school system was broke. Property owners out of work due to the Great Depression could not pay their property taxes, which were used to fund the public schools. Schools in inner cities lacked libraries, playgrounds, and often even adequate toilet facilities. Classrooms were overcrowded. Black teachers faced racial discrimination. School administrators piled on more clerical work onto teachers' already busy workloads. They introduced a blizzard of standardized tests. Still, according to an article published in 1927 in the American Teacher magazine, teachers were supposed to believe that teaching was a noble profession, free and immune from the cares of the more sordid world. The same article went on to say that many teachers, quote, believed their personal dignity and self-respect required that they keep aloof from any organization affiliated with labor. The Great Depression made teachers more militant. However, Chicago teachers stayed on the job despite the payless paydays. One Chicago teacher explained that they were determined not to desert the Chicago schools. It was not easy organizing Chicago's teachers. Only 10% of the teachers belonged to the 4 competing teachers' unions. But not getting paid helped arouse them. And 2 years later, 5,000 teachers converged on Chicago's largest banks in protest. They broke windows and overturned desks. Chicago's mayor, Ed Kelly, agreed to pay 4 of the 9 months back pay owed to them. Finally, in 1934, thanks to federal assistance, the Chicago teachers received all of their back pay. You only need read about the current Chicago teachers' struggle to see that the more things change, the more they stay the same.
Labor History in 2 brought to you by the Illinois Labor History Society and The Rick Smith Show.
Welcome back to the Rick Smith Show. Now, here is Rick Smith.
So as of today, it looks like half of the country can't get into New York. You remember, we've been talking about this for a couple of days now. Actually, been about 2 weeks, that New York, Connecticut, New Jersey, they have this pact. The governor of Cuomo of New York, Murphy of New Jersey, and Lamont of Connecticut have said, look, if you come from these certain states across the country, you've got to take a 14-day quarantine. We don't want a bunch of sick people coming back into our states and reinfecting our folks. We went through a whole hell of a lot to get this virus somewhat under control. We don't want people coming here and exposing. And look, and I said at the beginning, this is what you have to do. I just don't know how you're going to enforce it. But as of today, Alaska, Delaware, Indiana, Maryland, Missouri, Montana, North Dakota, Nebraska, Virginia, and Washington State are all no longer to freely enter the area without quarantine and without the threat of fines. And like I said, I think at some point we've got to be thinking about this. They're added to basically half the rest of the country, so over half the country now not welcome. And again, this is a leadership problem right from the start. From the guy that is sitting in our White House, it's that simple. Had we, and I'm I try to explain this to my kids, had we just taken like 2 more weeks, had we as a country just shut down for 2 more weeks, done the things that scientists tell us we should have been doing the isolation, doing the quarantining, and then getting sick people and isolating them and doing the tracing and all of that and more testing, we wouldn't be in the mess that we're in now. And we wouldn't be looking down the double barrel of what's coming. Because the fall, according to the studies and the models that I've seen, are really going to be bad. But again, as I said, it comes down to failed leadership at every level of the Trump administration. It's that simple. I'm going to take a quick break. Right back.
Remembering that united we bargain, divided we beg. Rick Smith.
During today's COVID-19 crisis, the PR departments of every brand name corporation are running slick ads nobly proclaiming, "We're all in this together." But simultaneously, the lobbying departments of those corporations are ignobly using the public's focus on the health crisis as cover for selfishly grabbing government favors. One of the grabbiest special interests are well-off corporate and parochial private schools, where students from some of America's wealthiest families get their education. For years, these private entities have been lobbying relentlessly to make taxpayers finance their schools, even though they usually have an ideological or religious curriculum, and some even share the extremist view that public schools should be eliminated. That extremist nook is where Betsy DeVos resides. She's a multi-billionaire heiress and longtime funder of far right-wing causes. Chosen by Trump to run America's education department, she's been trying to run our schools straight into private hands, but with little success. Then, along came the COVID federal relief package, including funds to help meet the education needs of low-income students in hard-hit public schools. "Hallelujah," shouted DeVos, grabbing the coronavirus as a way to advance her agenda. In May, she issued an edict requiring local public school districts to divert millions of the relief dollars from their disadvantaged students, forcing them to share their allotment with even the richest private schools. Astonishingly, Trump's haughty education secretary rationalized her directive as a matter of economic fairness, piously informing locals that they must not discriminate against the rich. This is Jim Hightower saying, luckily, DeVos's share with the rich dictum does not have the force of law, and public schools are fighting back. For information, go to National Coalition for Public Education at ncpecoalition.org.
What do the corporate powers from Wall Street to Walmart have in common? They hate the Hightower Lowdown. You can see why at www.hightowerlowdown.org.
Welcome back to the Rick Smith Show. Now, here is Rick Smith.
So today, Joe Biden came out with a plan for working families. And look, I've been saying this, from the beginning of this entire pandemic. All of the things that we've got to worry about. People losing their jobs, their homes. The initial stuff. That should be front and foremost, something Congress should be working on. But it's all of the other things. This fall, when kids aren't going to school, there is going to be a major child care crisis. And for older people and all kinds of stuff. Biden has come out with a proposal today, $775 billion plan to help with child care, to help with elder care, and to train 150,000 public health care workers to do some of those jobs. And again, as I've been saying, the Republicans they have no plans whatsoever. You can say that Biden's out of his mind, he doesn't know what he's doing. He's got some good plans and some ideas, which is why I'm not surprised that the American Federation of Government Employees, AFGE, have come out and endorsed Joe Biden for president here in 2020, and here to share some thoughts on why his union made that endorsement. I've asked Phil Glover to come talk with us. Phil is the national vice president of AFGE District 3. Phil, thanks for taking time for us.
Thank you, Rick. Appreciate it.
So let's start right with the endorsement. What's the reason?
Well, obviously, we went back after 2016 and we revamped our entire endorsement process. This was a very democratic process. We went out to 224,000 email addresses that we have for our members at home. We sent out a survey, and we also did a polling survey that was scientific of 2,000 members. And between those, we came up with about 65% of our membership wanted Joe Biden to be the next president. We had about 23% or less that were for President Trump currently. And we had a few that didn't want any endorsements. They don't like the federal union endorsing, but we feel that we need to be in the game. So we went with our membership and voted to endorse.
Yeah, ultimately, if you're not in the game, you're just on the menu, right?
And, unfortunately for a lot of our folks, they think if we ignore the political side we won't get harmed. But unfortunately, we've now seen, especially over this 3.5 years, that if you're not on the political side, you are going to get chewed up and spit out.
Yeah, I mean, and the sad reality is this administration, in my view, and I'm not putting words in your mouth, but from what I see from the outside, and some of the attacks that I've seen on EPA, some of the attacks I've seen on OSHA, some of the attacks that I've seen across our government, this administration has not been friendly to federal workers.
No, I mean, starting out just with the panels that he gets to appoint, he appointed anti-union lawyers to the Federal Services Impasses Panel, which decides disputes between the unions and management on bargaining disputes. You've got the Federal Labor Relations Authority, who, again, decides a bunch of unfair labor practice issues and things like that in the federal sector. He never even appointed a full board for the Merit Systems Protection Board, that if people got fired or got disciplined more than 30 days, they can't even go to that panel. There's not enough panel members. He's never appointed them. The FLRA still does not have a general counsel after 3.5 years. They can't even process an unfair labor practice case. So you're just in limbo.
Yeah.
And this has been our experience with this guy.
So, but here's the thing. I go back to 2016, and I don't like to sound like a broken record, but all of this was very predictable back then. I mean, this is not surprising, is it?
No, I don't think it is. I mean, if you looked at his history in Atlantic City, how he did business, we sent out all of those kind of articles, and this is this, and this is this. There just was an underlying problem there with the Democratic candidate at that point. And while our union endorsed, we didn't do a very democratic process. It was before I was on the National Executive Council. We simply did a scientific poll of about 890 people. We came up with a number and we endorsed. And really, that didn't generate enough people to get out and do the right things.
Right.
So we needed to revamp that.
So let me ask you this, because it's one thing to be anti-Trump, and I look, as a working person in this country, I don't know how you can look at his record over the last 3.5 years and go, oh yeah, that's my guy. But it's a whole nother thing to be pro Joe Biden. What is it about Biden that makes you go, this isn't just about Trump?
Well, I think if you look at, even you go back to the Obama administration, you look at who they appointed over federal agencies, just your general work life was better. What is happening in the federal sector under his appointments has just been devastating. Starting with Betsy DeVos in the education department, she completely decimated our union there by stripping them of a contract. She took a 44-article contract down to 8 articles and imposed it. And again, because of the panels and all of the things that we have to go through to try to get a decision, it has been impossible to get that reversed. The EPA has gone through a similar process with Pruitt and Wheeler, where they imposed a contract. You don't impose a bargaining agreement. It's bargained collectively together. You ratify it and you put it into place. His appointments have been a disaster for our members in that regard. Our Social Security Administration, their contract was completely eviscerated. You have the VA right now in front of the Federal Services Panel. And again, they are not going to get a fair shake. And any collective bargaining agreement right now that is up in the federal sector is going in front of these panels, and it will be bad for the members, for their work life, for their ability to take care of grievances and other things. So we look at that. We look at the appointments is going to be a big thing. We also feel that he will fund the agencies appropriately, and that he will reverse the 3 major executive orders that Trump had put into place in 2018, which took away a bunch of labor rights and employee rights. And I say more employee rights because he took away rights to respond to disciplinary actions. He cut their timeframes down, no matter what their contract said. Just a lot of things that he did to harm employees. You can go back to the Bureau of Prisons. They eliminated 6,000 positions in the Bureau of Prisons. They're always understaffed. They've been understaffed through the Bush years. We started to rebuild that. in the Obama years, and he got rid of 6,000 positions through Jeff Sessions as an appointment. And a lot of our members, you know, they don't follow this stuff daily. I get it. They have ball games to go to, and they got kids, and they're working 12-hour shifts. We try to watch this stuff daily, and when you look at what has happened here, he has made it very difficult for federal employees to operate safely and effectively.
And ultimately, I would argue making them less safe, you know, especially if you're talking about the Bureau of Prisons. But I was reading a story the other day that said that, you know, there are like 39,000 federal employees that have tested positive for the coronavirus. And you go, you know, what has this administration done to keep them safe? I mean, this is the administration that locked them out and then forced them back to work. I mean, it's everything that you could do to basically whip them and whip your workforce, and then have them come back and want to support you is kind of crazy to me.
Well, and that's, you know, you consider in a workforce, like we represent about 600,000 federal workers. Now there's other unions obviously that represent the federal sector, but you're talking 39,000, Rick. You know, that's only ones tested.
Right.
We've had trouble getting tests. We've had trouble in many agencies, the VA included, where they didn't want to give tests. People working around ill people in the VA. We had trouble with PPE from the beginning, trying to protect nurses and doctors, and, you know, handing out a mask and telling them to use it once a week, not giving them, you know, shift to shift mask changes. We've had a bunch of these things, and the responses from these agencies has been to ignore it, put it off. They're fighting workers' comp cases where our members who are sick are filing for workers' comp, and they're fighting that. So, you know, they're trying to say, well, oh no, you might have got it at a grocery store. You might have got it over here. No, I'm working at a VA in a unit with a bunch of veterans who have it, and I'm sick. And then they want to fight the workers' comp case. This has been constant since this whole COVID-19 issue has started. No different than the public response, except they have much more control over the federal system.
Right.
You know,
and basically what's happening to you is what they'd like to see happen to the rest of us. And the reason I bring this up is because, you know, in this next stimulus, there's talk of pushing for an employee liability shield. An employer liability shield, and basically creating the environment that you're talking about, to where if you get sick on the job, you have no recourse other than to shoulder it yourself.
Well, and at the same time, you know, like we've had TSOs, transportation security officers, who we've had, you know, I think six or seven die of this. At the same time, fighting the administration for the proper PPE, fighting them to make passengers wear masks through the checkpoints, and use other safety precautions. And we have fought that over the last few months. It's just ridiculous that we have to be, you know, listen to the doctors, listen to scientists. At the worst that could happen is you wore a mask, you know, for 20 minutes that you didn't want to wear.
Right.
But you might have saved somebody from getting this virus. And, you know, I'm no doctor. I listen to them. That's kind of our kind of what we've been advising members, is follow the guidelines, listen to scientists. You know, that's what you have to do. And you know, we've really had it over the last 3.5 years. It has been a real mess with this administration. You know, at first people were like, well, let him get in there. You know, I'm sure he'll have people around him that'll guide him through the federal workforce and things like that. And that just never got off the ground.
Yeah, they guided him to do all the horrible things that their think tanks have been dreaming up for years. And they had a guy who was willing to try all of them and do all of them. And what you ended up with is not just, because we haven't even talked about, you know, his appointment to the Supreme Court that allowed the Janus decision to go through, which has been horrible for public sector workers. But every bad idea that's been floated over the last 20 years, this guy has put into place. And it's, you know, from an outsider's view, it's got to be a hostile workplace for federal employees to show up to every day.
Well, speaking of the Janus case, what they then did is the Federal Labor Relations Authority decided they were requested by the head of the Office of Management and Budget and the Office of Personal Management to look at the Janus case, to look at our dues deduction structure for the federal system. And these things don't add up. Janus is a completely different issue than what we have in statute in the federal side for taking dues deductions, but they did it anyway. So they determined that we used to have, we were able through our contracts to keep members in year to year. At their anniversary date, they could get out of the union. You know, because we are an open shop in the federal sector. We're not a closed shop. So the FLRA just ruled that, oh no, we can keep you in a year, but then after that, members can get in and out anytime they wish. And that sounds, oh, that's great, that's freedom. But what it does is it makes it almost untenable to handle budgets, to make sure that you have the right, you know, finances coming in. You know, you have people who get upset over one issue, not wait and jump out of the union. I mean, it's just it's really a very difficult thing to manage.
And it would be a paperwork nightmare. It would be a paperwork nightmare of people coming in and out month to month, multiple times a year, coming back and forth. And because, you know, look, they're going to want your benefits. This is one of those moments where when they get in trouble, you still got to represent them, even though they're not paying. It's you know, it's just one of those things that just seems, well, it seems like a plan on how to destroy unions more than help them.
Well, and the thing is these rulings, all of this case law, we're talking about with these panels and other things, has been in place since the late 70s. Civil Service Reform Act was passed in 1978 under Jimmy Carter. And we've had that stability in the federal workforce for a long time. Prior to that, it was a little dicier because you had just an executive order from Kennedy. But, you know, this is where when you talk to people and they go, well, it can't be that bad. Well, you go ahead and flip 40 years of case law on its head, and then you try to figure out how to run that system the right way, or how to still run a union while you've lost all of these contractual benefits and things that we've earned through the years.
Well, I mean, that is the goal. The goal is to handcuff you and destroy you so that you're not fighting for your members. You're not giving them a voice. You're not providing safe workplaces and doing the things that we've come to accustom from labor unions in this country. Last question I've got for you, because, you know, obviously the topic is you know, the Biden endorsement. What's the elevator pitch, not just to your members, but to working people across this country on why Joe Biden at this moment?
Well, I think Biden brings decency back to the White House, number one. I mean, I think that's got to be after this, you know, there's no norms left. I think, you know, number one, a Biden presidency brings back some normalcy. You know, we're not going to see 3 a.m. tweets from the toilet. You know, things like that that need to stop. I mean, this is the president of the United States. This isn't your high school buddy who got drunk at the bar and decided to drunk text you. This is the president of the United States, and there has to be some decorum brought back, some reasonableness, some listening skills. I'd like to think that our union could meet with a President Biden and talk about issues with him. I used to meet with him when he was the Judiciary Committee chair way back, and he would listen to what you had to say. Now, he didn't always agree with you, and that was fine. But you had a chance to make your case.
Right.
I just think that, you know, stability, who he appoints to run federal agencies, and that affects the public. I mean, you know, the thing that I get that, you know, we're talking about an internal endorsement process, but the public wants federal agencies to work properly. They want the Social Security Administration to work properly. But you have Saul, you know, out there, the commissioner, who is, they kept them off telework. Then we had to force them onto telework with COVID. Now he wants to force them back off, even though there's states that are not open. They constantly messing with their programming and their staffing and all these things. The public needs Social Security to work. You've got the VA. You got Wilkie out there who is anti-labor, frankly, some of the things he's come up with veterans all of those things that they tried to privatize, they ran out of money. They had to send them back into the VA system, and then the veterans had to go back to the back of the line. So you want people that have knowledge of running federal agencies. I get that everybody wants some newcomer. You got to have some stability in these federal agencies. And that's what I hope Biden will bring back.
Yeah.
And that's what we'll work for with Labor 2020.
No, that's a great thing, because the reality, and I've been saying this for years, the people who tell you that government doesn't work, obviously when they get into power, they make sure that it doesn't, and we end up in this moment. But Phil, I appreciate the time. Good stuff as always. Look forward to talking to you again.
Thank you, Rick. Appreciate the time.
Good stuff. Phil Glover, AFGE District 3 National Vice President. Love to hear your thoughts. You can email me, rick@thericksmithshow.com. Do you think Joe Biden will bring back the stability? Do you think there'll be drunk tweets? I would give, to be honest, if you could make the justification that Trump was drunk while he was tweeting at 3 a.m., I think that would be a lot more forgiving. Just my thoughts. I'd love to hear yours, though. rick@thericksmithshow.com. Quick break. Right back.
Saving work in America, one show at a time. The Rick Smith Show.
I'm Rick Smith, and this is Labor History in 2. On this day in labor history, the year was 1877. That was the day some of the worst violence of the Great Railroad Strike erupted in Pittsburgh. The strike started days earlier. It's contested as to whether it began in Martinsburg, West Virginia, or Baltimore, Maryland. The strike spread rapidly along the Baltimore and Ohio Railroad to New York State, Pennsylvania, and throughout the Midwest. At its height, the Great Railroad Strike involved well over 100,000 workers. The strike began on the Pennsylvania Railroad on the 19th. Management repeatedly tried to move trains through the yards and was confronted by angry strikers. Pennsylvania guardsmen were called out. The strikers presented the railroad with their demands. They wanted an end to double-engine trains that required fewer workers, wages reinstated, reinstatement for their fired co-workers, and an end to pay grades. Local militia sided with the strikers and refused to show for duty. When thousands of strikers gathered at the depot, the Pennsylvania National Guard moved unsuccessfully to disperse them. Then they fired on the strikers, killing 20 and wounding 29. The strikers were infuriated by the deadly aggression and drove guardsmen into a nearby railroad roundhouse. Word spread quickly throughout the city of the massacre, launching a virtual general strike. Workers began seizing arms wherever they could find them. They set fires to dozens of railroad buildings, burned down the Union Depot, destroyed over 100 locomotives, and more than 1,000 freight and passenger cars. The next day, guardsmen shot their way out of the roundhouse, killing 20 more as they were chased from the city. A total of 3,000 federal troops would be necessary to quell strikers' fury by month's end. Labor History in 2 brought to you by the Illinois Labor History Society and The Rick Smith Show. For more information, go to laborhistoryin2.com.
Welcome back to The Rick Smith Show. Now, here is Rick Smith.
So the big news coming out of Ohio today, and it's one of those things where, I remember the push to bail out the nuclear industry in Ohio. I remember the push to save, because it happened here in Pennsylvania too. There was the push to save 3 Mile Island. There was, it was like $1 billion bill that was going through that, lobbyist money, was pushing on all sides of it. I remember it was a big thing. Ultimately, the bailout bill stalled, and I don't know if our governor would have signed it or not. I'm not 100% sure. But in Ohio, evidently, the Speaker of the House, this guy Larry Householder, he and 4 others have been arrested today. I guess a huge bribery scheme, a huge money laundering scheme. They've been charged with crimes of laundering and bribery and all of that over this. What is this bailout bill, House Bill 6, which was $1 billion to save 2 of the Ohio nuclear power plants from closing. And basically it failed. I mean, they needed the huge influx of cash to keep open, and $1 billion. And I remember at the time going, $1 billion? Are you kidding me? We could use that $1 billion to move towards, some better investment, some type of green energy, something. Now, Householder was arrested along with one of his advisors, this Jeff Longstreet, a lobbyist named Neil Clark, the former Ohio Republican Party chairman, Matt Borges, and the co-founder of the Oxley Group, Juan Cepedas. They have all been arrested. And according to the story, there are more arrests coming. And the part of the story that I loved and I immediately started, thinking about my grandfather about is, and I tell my kids this all the time, if you're messing up, make sure you're the only one who knows you're messing up. Now, my grandfather, being a lifelong truck driver, used much stronger, coarser language than that. But if you're messing up, don't run around telling everyone. Evidently, Householder, the Speaker of the House, and these others evidently made a ton of incriminating statements about what they were doing to undercover agents, and this is what got them busted. And you go, if you got away with it, shut up. My grandfather always said, if you don't tell anybody, you got about a 50% chance of not getting ratted out. The second you tell one other person, it's guaranteed, it's over, you're done. And, here it is. Now, Householder's been somebody who, he was under federal investigation a couple years ago. No charges came about it. The joke that I saw come out of all of this that I thought was hysterical was that the former Speaker of the House, I think his name's Roethlisberger or something along those lines. He showed up because he thought he was going to be arrested because he was indicted the last time around. So I guess the shelf life of a Speaker of the House in Ohio, not very long. But as I was reading through this, I was thinking about Ohio, and I was thinking about Pennsylvania where I live, and our Speaker of the House, and go, boy, wouldn't it be great to see him go to jail? Because I'm sure that the same kind of schemes have happened in other states. Because understand, I think it was New York and Illinois that did kind of similar bills to bail out their nuclear industry. Now remember, we're supposed to believe that this is really cheap and this is, the green. I've been told that nuclear is the green energy. Except we haven't really figured out how to make it affordable. In this vein, now, evidently, they needed $1 billion to stay viable. For those people who keep telling me that green energy is too expensive, hello? For all those people who say that we should have been still burning dirty coal, think about the healthcare costs. Hello? I mean, there have been a ton of studies out there that show that if we were to move to a green economy, that it would be much cheaper to fuel our homes. It'd be much cheaper to fuel our economy. And, maybe we wouldn't have gazillion degree days like the last couple of days. Maybe Trump wouldn't have had to sit in a 100-degree interview. Just a thought. Love to hear yours. You can email me at rick@thericksmithshow.com. I'm going to take a quick break. Right back. Stick around.
Waving the flag of freedom for people, not corporations. Rick Smith.
As the rain continues pouring in southern China, an expert warns the Three Gorges Dam is at risk of collapse.
Record rains and floods threaten world's largest dam.
The new British study touted as the strongest evidence yet that what's happening in the Arctic is human-caused climate change.
Siberian heat wave impossible without intervention by humans. New study finds Plus,
we got to leave this little planet, leave this little piece of real estate a little greener, a little cleaner, and a little more peaceful. We got to do it.
remembering civil rights icon Congressman John Lewis, champion of environmental justice.
All of those memories and more straight ahead from BradBlog.com. I'm Brad Friedman.
And I'm Desi Doyen.
Stand by for 6 minutes of independent green news, politics, analysis, and snarky comment.
And none of us, not one of us, can afford to be tired. Don't get weary.
I'm weary, Congressman. I'm very tired. This is your Green News Report. Okay, Desi Doyen, with everything else going on in the world, the world's largest dam may be about to collapse. Really?
Yes, really. Ominous warnings in China after more than a month of record-breaking torrential downpours have caused widespread deadly flooding. Authorities in central China blew up a dam on Sunday to release pressure behind it, and they have opened floodgates on the massive Three Gorges Dam on the Yangtze River. As you say, the largest dam in the world, because water levels behind the massive structure are more than 50 feet above flood stage, threatening to collapse it.
Oh, good Lord.
More rain and flooding are forecast. Reports indicate around 2 million people have been evacuated, with alerts for major downstream cities like Wuhan and Shanghai, all during a pandemic. Estimated direct losses from the floods are already more than $7 billion US, according to the Chinese government.
Well, I'm only surprised it hasn't happened yet, to be frank.
And remember last month when parts of Siberia hit a record 100 degrees Fahrenheit?
I do.
Well, that record heat wave is still ongoing as Russian firefighters battle more than 40 large forest fires across the region. Now, a preliminary analysis of the record temperatures by an international team of researchers has concluded that human-caused climate change made Siberia's persistent heat 600 times more likely, and that this kind of prolonged intense heat event would happen less than once every 80,000 years if not for man-made climate change. They call it, quote, effectively impossible without human influence. And it has real human and economic impacts. The wildfires, destabilized permafrost causing infrastructure damage like that massive fuel spill from a broken fuel storage tank last month, and also an intense drought that has caused complete crop failure in 23 districts in Siberia's grain-growing region.
So, in other words, climate change in Siberia is really, really bad.
Yes.
Yes.
And extreme weather events like the record rainfall in China and record heat in the Arctic are in line with climate scientists' predictions of man-made global warming.
Well, knock me over with a feather.
Here in the U.S., a new study confirms earlier research finding that long-term exposure to toxic air pollution is a major risk factor in dying from COVID-19, and the study implicates the Trump administration's Environmental Protection Agency decision to freeze enforcement of pollution rules as a contributing factor. Researchers at American University measured a distinct increase in concentrations of toxic soot and ozone air pollution in counties with industrial facilities after the Trump EPA relaxed enforcement rules due to the coronavirus pandemic. Those counties saw a nearly 20% increase in daily death rates from COVID-19 through May, compared to counties with fewer polluting facilities.
Well, White House Press Secretary Kayleigh McEnany offered what I think is pretty much the slogan at this point for the Trump administration.
What's that?
The science should not stand in the way of this.
Ah, yes. And, of course, the strongest spike in deaths from coronavirus was in minority neighborhoods. The researchers say the evidence implicates the Trump EPA, suggesting that the enforcement freeze made the pandemic worse. Finally, civil rights icon Congressman John Lewis passed away late last week, and as part of his life's work to expand civil rights for Black Americans and all Americans, Lewis was also a champion for environmental justice, fighting the environmental racism at the heart of why minority and frontline communities disproportionately bear the brunt of industrial pollution and the accelerating impacts of climate change. In a fiery address in 2012, Congressman Lewis encouraged all Americans to never give up the fight.
Hang in there. Not just for this generation, but for generation yet unborn. We got to leave this little planet, leave this little piece of real estate a little greener, a little cleaner, and a little more peaceful. We got to do it. We have a right to know what is in the food we eat. We have a right to know what is in the water we drink. We have a right to know what is in the air we breathe. We can do it. We can do it.
He will be missed. For much more on all of these stories and the ones we couldn't get to today, please check out our website at greennews.bradblog.com. Find us, follow us, and share us planet-wide on the Facebooks and the Twitters at Green News Report. I'm Brad Friedman.
And I'm Desi Doyen.
And this has been your Green News Report.
Welcome back to the Rick Smith Show. Now, here is Rick Smith.
So people back in the streets in Portland, Oregon. And, the thing is interesting is Donald Trump recently claimed that Portland was more dangerous than Afghanistan. And initially my thoughts went to, is Putin putting bounties on the heads of citizens in Portland? I guess he wouldn't care. But, this is one of those weird moments where, you've got a sitting U.S. president who's saying, a U.S. city is more dangerous than a war zone. And it's his decision that unilaterally he's going to send in unnamed, unmarked federal agents to arrest people without warrants and do it preemptively. Kind of like, the Minority Report, or the Majority Report thing that the movie with Tom Hanks, I guess it was not Tom Hanks, Tom Cruise, Minority Report, where they were, coming up and, this person's going to commit a crime in the future. Let's go get them. It's crazy. And it's not just Portland. It's, Chicago soon, and they've threatened other major cities, Oakland, Philadelphia, New York, eventually coming to a town near you. So the question is it warranted? Is Portland such a horrible place? Is it more dangerous than Afghanistan? That's why I've asked Angel Almanza to come talk with us. He is a Portland resident. He's somebody who's been at the protests. Angel, thanks for taking time for us.
Well, it's an honor to be on your show. Thank you.
So how bad is Portland? Is it one of the S-hole countries that Donald Trump tells us about?
It's one of the safest cities in the country. And no, that characterization is false. And of course, he does have a problem with the truth. So I'm not surprised.
Yeah, well, none of us are. But what we see on Fox News, though, Angel, is things are burning and people are breaking stuff and spray painting stuff. Angel, spray paint.
Yeah. Well, when you look at that, it's maybe about 17 city blocks, not even 1% of the entire Portland metro area. However, considering there is graffiti and there is activity going on downtown, I mean, Banksy said graffiti is the art of the oppressed. So if the feds are, in fact, responding to graffiti, they're attacking the oppressed. And to be blunt, if that isn't fascism, I really don't know what is.
Well, I mean, the fact that we're and I got to tell you, I never thought in my lifetime we'd see what could be mercenaries. We're still not sure 100% of who these federal agents are. There were some reports that they're tactical units from the Border Patrol folks, maybe from the U.S. Marshal Service. They're tactical units. We don't really know, do we?
They refuse to identify themselves, and so we have not received any specific confirmation as to who they really are as far as.
So all we know, it could be Betsy DeVos's brother, Eric Prince, and his mercenary group being funded to do this, because we just don't know. So let me ask you, as someone who lives there in Portland, and I understand you've been part of the protests and the things that are going on, have you seen the kind of the violence that were shown on Fox News, that it would make us believe that this is such a horrible place?
No, that's not what I've seen. I've seen a lot of really good people, very common people coming out and standing up for Black lives, standing up against tyranny, and that's what I've seen. I've seen moms, I've seen military veterans, I have seen naked, well, I haven't seen, but I saw the article about the naked lady Godiva yoga person, so we are definitely, using our arsenal.
And the reason that you're out there is?
The reason is, the reason I'm out there personally is it's time to take a stand. Right now, police brutality is just out of control. Black lives are in danger, and the reason I am supporting Black Lives Matter is because it's needed right now.
Right. What do you say to the person, and I get this a lot, and I'm curious your thoughts. What do you say to the person, though, Angela, says, well, it's not just Black lives, it's all lives matter?
I say to that person, all lives do matter, but the only way they can matter is if we start with Black lives. They're the most in danger right now, and if we really do believe that all lives matter, we must stand up for Black lives now.
You know, it's amazing to me how, you know, in this moment of something that simple, because that is the most simple response to all of this, that you still have people who refuse to just make that simple step of saying that, yes, we see it all the time on the news. We see these horrible tragedies play out, you know, social media all around us. And it's for some people, it's an impossible step to say that Black lives are right now the most in danger.
I'd say that a lot of it has a lot to do with propaganda. A lot of it has to do with ignorance. And the more that a mind is open, the more that you learn the stories of some of the people that have been killed by the police, not until then do you really give yourself a chance to reflect on what's going on and maybe even reflect on your own bias.
Well, I think everyone has their own bias, absolutely. But, you know, most of the folks that I've met who throw that, you know, the all lives matter, do it so out of a racist position more than anything. Not that they really care about anyone else's life, but it's just that, you know, it comes from in my belief, it comes from a racist position.
I have to agree. That is from a racist and also a position that doesn't understand what Black Lives Matters. What it really stands for.
So what, you know, I'd love to hear your thoughts on what it stands for, because, you know, I've asked a couple of people, and I've gotten some different responses. I'm curious what your belief of the movement is.
So you've got a couple. It's twofold here. You've got what the movement stands for and the ultimate demands of the protests right now. So what the movement generally stands for, as I understand it, is taking back funds that, you know, from like the police that, you know, are used to basically criminalize people and put them in jail and reinvest those funds, and taking those funds and putting them back into the community, particularly communities of color, and focusing on disenfranchised people. And we believe with this system, and I think it's a really genius concept, is you are able to prevent crimes and you stop criminalizing people and putting them into a cycle of poverty and a cycle of going in and out of prison.
Right. So you see, because, you know, right when the whole defund the police thing came up, I immediately said, you know, you can't defund the police entirely. You have to have something of a law enforcement arm, but we do need to invest in poverty communities. I personally grew up in a high poverty community, and, you know, speaking from my experience, the best way you stop crime is by giving people hope and opportunity, giving them a good education, giving them some type of employment that's going to make their lives better, something that every day they wake up with a goal to improve themselves. That to me is the way to go. And, you know, part of the conversation around defunding the police is trying to move those resources, at least this is how I'm hearing you say it, is trying to move in that direction.
That's correct. And one arm of it is the police have been put in a position where they do things that are outside of their training. They are not trained social workers.
Right.
They are not mental health specialists. It is extremely negligent to have the police respond to someone in a mental health crisis when their best tool is a gun.
No, you're absolutely right. And, you know, I guess the question then becomes, you know, if you're someone who's a part of the Black Lives Matter movement, if you're someone who's saying that we need to defund the police, does that necessarily mean that you're anti-police?
No, the police have a very important job to protect your community, but they're doing too many other jobs. They're stressed. They're overwhelmed.
Is it possible to
adequately?
Right. No, I mean, because we're put into these polar opposite camps, and as I've said, I support the idea of using funds to do all the things that we've talked about. But then you get painted as, well, you're just anti-police and you're bad. And we get just stuck in these polar positions. And what I'm trying to ask, all people is, is it possible to say, look, we can reinvent this wheel a little bit better. We can do things better without actually being anti either side.
There is a lot that is happening, and a lot of the problems and the corruption that you see at all levels when it comes to law enforcement is a distrust that has come. You have the incidents where people are killed and their murders are systematically covered up. You've got where the police are covering for each other. You have where the medical examiners are covering for the police, and you have to get independent autopsies and coroner reports, reviews that come out very differently from what was found in the original investigation. It's very important that we go into a new partnership where there's community oversight of the police. And we don't have that now. And we really can't expect the people who write the reports to be the same people who are under the gun, under this. You just don't get responsibility. You don't get, you just, currently the system is not working for us. And
no, and for me, it comes back to some of the, you talk about training, as I watch some of the arrests that were happening, because in this day and age, as you know, there are video cameras everywhere. You can see 16 different views of someone being arrested. And what's shocking to me as I've been watching all these is back when I was a kid, if the police arrest you, turn around, put your hands in the car, they handcuff you, they put you in the car. Now it seems like there's no more of that. Now it's 6 people jump on you, throw you on the ground, and each one is jumping on a limb to hold you down when you weren't resisting to begin with. It seems like we've now turned, it almost into a rodeo show where you've got these cops just, destroying people.
It's definitely a sign that there is no oversight.
Yeah.
There's no checks and balance, and there are frequently no consequences for murdering people. If you have that kind of freedom, you're very liable to do about anything.
No, it's an excellent point. You brought up a second ago that about the demands. Obviously, you spoke about why you're out there in the streets, why you've showed up to the protests, and why I think others have as well. The other thing that we always get, and we get this anytime there's a movement of a large group of people that, well, there are no demands. No one has taken their points and nailed it to the church door like Martin Luther. But what are the demands? What do we want to come out of this? Because I have my own daughter telling me, well, they're just in the streets, causing trouble. They haven't really, done anything. What is it folks want?
So the specific demands from BLM, and they are in cooperation with other community activists, is they want to reduce the police budget by $50 million and to take the funds to reinvest into the community. So far, the city council has earmarked $15 million, and it's still, kind of up in the air. I think I'm not entirely sure about how that's going to be proceeding. It will ultimately happen or not. Definitely community oversight of the police is their demand, and a militarized response to the protests. And, as the movement goes, and this demand is kind of a requirement of us as protesters, there's a personal challenge to everyone for reflection and a spirit, in a spirit that's really rich in forgiveness. And so there's a lot of themes, a lot of demands, and a lot of aims in this movement.
Okay, and how would this money be spent? You said 50 million is the demand, 15 is what they're talking about. Where would the money be spent? How do you envision that being used?
Well, from what I can tell, since we're taking away all those hats from the police with reducing their budget and defunding them, we absolutely need to put that money into mental health counseling, drug treatment. We need to go into communities of color and start early preschool education for everyone, really, especially those who are most vulnerable people who are lower, socioeconomic status. These kinds of things are very key to building our communities, making them safer, and in conjunction with a complete change in attitude towards our society as well.
There's a lot of work to be done. How long do you anticipate, people being in the streets? It's been well over 50 days now. How long do you envision this continuing?
I can see this continuing as long as you can imagine.
Yeah.
I really don't see I see no end in sight. In particular, with the provocations that we have been seeing, we definitely are seeing a larger. Since about June 4th, I started protesting. Maybe went 10 times, 13 times before this last weekend. And with this new provocation, this kind of it motivated me to get back to protesting and to support people like the moms and the veterans and all the people that are trying to fight for this change.
No, because, at the end of the day, I keep going back to that Pastor Niemöller quote. First they came for one group and I said nothing, and then they came for another and another. And eventually, by the time they were coming for me, there was nobody left. And this is one of those moments where, this is clearly a trial program that this administration is moving forward with. And if they don't get the kind of reaction that I'm seeing out of Portland, it could come to every city across this country. So I give you guys credit for taking this seriously as you guys have. Keep up the great work and stay safe.
Thank you very much.
Angela, I appreciate your thoughts. Again, as I've said, this is one of those moments where there are very sane, rational demands, yet the mainstream media has they're just out there to destroy stuff. I saw a Fox News woman go on about, they're just spray painting stuff. And, the reality is are there a couple of them out there? Yeah. There's always a couple of, nitwits and knotheads. The reality is the mass of the people out there are fighting for a better life. Anyway, I'd love to hear your thoughts. You can email me, rick@thericksmithshow.com. Quick break. Right back to wrap things up. Stick around.
Saving work in America, one show at a time. The Rick Smith Show.
I'm Rick Smith, and this is Labor History in 2. On this day in labor history, the year was 1878. That was the day that a new song was introduced to the U.S. labor movement. Reverend Jesse H. Jones set the lyrics of a poem that had been written by I.G. Blanchard more than a decade earlier. The song was called The 8-Hour Day. The fight for 8 hours had become one of the central causes of labor. In 1850, the average work week was 70 hours. This meant that workers had little time for anything else beside their daily toil. After the Civil War, calls for the 8-hour day gained momentum. It became a movement that united workers from different workplaces and backgrounds. 8-hour leagues were formed in cities across the nation. They hosted talks and rallies to spread the word about the need to shorten the work week. At rallies, protesters waved 8-hour banners. They also sang the song that became their anthem. The first verse boldly began. We mean to make things over. We are tired of toil for naught, with but bare enough to live upon, and never an hour for thought. We want to feel the sunshine. We want to smell the flowers. We are sure that God has willed it, and we mean to have 8 hours. We're summoning our forces from the shipyard, shop, and mill. 8 hours for work, 8 hours for rest, 8 hours for what we will. The 8-Hour Day song continues to be reimagined today, including this version by Rhythm Fest.
Labor History in 2 brought to you by the Illinois Labor History Society and The Rick Smith Show.
Welcome back to the Rick Smith Show. Now, here is Rick Smith.
So the Minnesota legislature has passed what they are calling a broad slate of police accountability measures. No more chokeholds. That's going to be banned. They're going to ban what they called warrior-style training. And it goes back to what I was saying a second ago. When I was a kid, if you got arrested, you put your hands on the car, spread your legs, and then they would put your arms behind your back and handcuff you, and then they would escort you. Every video that I see of someone being arrested in these protests, they get knocked to the ground, and then like a bunch of people jump on top of them. There was the one where the kid's riding on the bike. He's just riding his bike, and the cop comes up and just clotheslines him off the bike. And the kid's legs up in the air and lands right on the back of his neck and head. And then like 3 guys jump on top of him, and they're assaulting this kid. And I think about it from my perspective. If that were to happen to me, that would not be a good thing. and this is what's happened with our police forces in a lot of cases. So I think the push to undo some of this stuff is not bad. But here's where I'm at as well. There are some bad people in this country. There are people that you need to have a police force to restrain. There's no question in that. But not everybody is that bad person. And that's where the training, that's where all of the other stuff have to come into place. Someone sent me a video of this cop, just screaming at this black guy while he's sitting in the car. And, immediately my mind goes, this is not de-escalation. And I've had moments where I've been interacting with police as an old white guy, where they're clearly aggressive and clearly wanting to ramp up aggression. And it's poor training, but it's more than that. It's people who they feel that they're superior, and that's not what policing should be about. I've known a lot of people who have been cops over the years, and I have respect for some of them, not all of them. Just like any profession, there are some good ones, there are some bad ones, and then there's the culture. And the culture, in my view, is what's the problem here. There's some good people, sure. I'm not gonna disagree with that. But if you watched the video of George Floyd being held down for almost 9 minutes, there were 4 cops standing around there, and not one of them seemed to have the wherewithal to say and to act to get one of their colleagues off the guy. Just my thought. But we'll see what happens out of this. They've passed this accountability measure. No more, like I said, no more chokeholds, no more of the warrior style training. They want to have rule changes on the use of force. There's a bunch of things in their citizens councils, arbitration rulings, stuff like this. It'll be interesting to see how it plays out. Now there are some who are saying, look, we need to put psychiatrists and psychologists, caseworkers, and that's all helpful. But as Angel was saying a moment ago, you want to reinvest in these communities, and in my view, you got to give people jobs. It comes back to investment in education and employment. I've said from the beginning, I do not believe in welfare. There should be no handout programs anywhere. There should be jobs programs. I think that would go a long way in helping. And if there are no jobs, you get people into job training and you give them the ability to make a living and support themselves in that vein, so that everyone doesn't have to be a criminal and have to live in the shadows just to put food on the table. Just my thought, obviously. I would, however, love to hear yours, because this is one of those hot button topics not going away. And as I think Angel pointed out, those folks are going to be in the streets as long as necessary. The old labor frame of one day longer, and I hope they do, especially over this latest, this just terrible decision by the Trump administration. But again, love to hear your thoughts. Rick at thericksmithshow.com. If you missed any of today's program, you can download the podcast there at the website, or you can get the app on the smartphone. Take the program on the go wherever you go. As always, thanks so much for tuning in. We'll see you back here next time.